So these centres, these monasteries, if you like, are almost like universities in a sense, in that they became centres of learning and specialisation in the Dharma. So welcome to Wednesday's Dharma Night. Tonight we're going to carry on the theme we've been talking about for the last few months, actually. We've been talking about the three jewels of Buddhism, the Buddha himself, the Dharma, the teaching of the Buddha, and the Sangha, the community of people who follow the teaching of the Buddha. And tonight we're going to be talking, following on about the Sangha jewel. So we've finished the Buddha and the Dharma jewels, and we're going to be talking a bit more about the Sangha jewel. And in our discussions, we've been following this book by Sangharakshita, the founder of Triratna. It's called The Three Jewels. And it's a fantastic book, actually, and we've been following that as a guide, if you like, for our discussions. And in the book, Sangharakshita talks about the Sangha, and he talks about there being two really broad classifications about the types of people who constitute the Sangha. And he talks about people who, if you like, are lay followers of the Buddha, people who've been moved by their experience of practicing the Dharma and have modified to some extent their life and in that experience. And then he talks about, for the want of a better word, we'll call it the monks or nuns, where the effect of the Dharma has radically altered their life, and their energy is directed solely. Their focus is the attainment of enlightenment or the realization of the truth of the Dharma, and it's that community that we're going to be talking a little bit about this evening. And it's just really to maybe give some idea as to about what we're talking about when we talk about a Buddhist monk or a Buddhist nun. So I'll use the word monk for the sake of argument, but it relates to men and women. So the Buddha himself, before he became the Buddha, he was called Gautama. So before his enlightenment, he was called Gautama. And he was a very privileged young man, and he had everything that his society at the time, 2,500 years ago, could offer him. So he had, palaces and elephants and money and servants, and anything you could think of that society at that time could offer. He had that at his disposal. But he also was troubled. He was troubled because he realised that no matter how privileged he was and what sort of position he held in society, that he was subject to aging, sickness and death. And that deeply troubled him. And he decided to leave his privileged position and go and lead the homeless life. And at the time of the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, that was something which was not a strange thing. People accepted that people maybe had spiritual yearnings, and to leave their home life and to leave all their possessions, to just live with basically robes and a begging bowl, and to have no home and to wander around the countryside. That was an accepted mode of life, and in some sense a respected mode of life for people. And he decided to do that. And those people, so they held that in common. So they would be homeless, these wanderers, these spiritual wanderers, and they would have some sort of ethical sort of code, if you like, that was expected of them by the lay, or by common people, if you like, or other people. They would be expected to be, not to harm living beings. They would be expected to not to steal. Which is important because they would let them wander through their communities, and they wanted to be able to trust them, as well as respect them in their aspirations, and they would normally be celibate, and they would also be expected not to claim supernormal powers, which I think is quite an interesting one. And if you think, when you leave, if you leave on a spiritual quest, you sort of, what do you do? Where do you go when you're homeless and you've got nothing? You want a teacher, really, don't you? You want a guru or someone you respect. So I imagine the claim to supernormal powers might, you might be following a charlatan or something. So it's important that they didn't do that. So honesty, I guess, was something that was expected of these wanderers. So the Buddha himself, when he left his privileged state, he went to a meditation teacher, and he learned meditation, and he got to a high, he attained all that he could in that area, but he still didn't see the liberation from aging, birth, and death, and so he went to another teacher, and the same thing happened, and then he went to become an ascetic. So who practiced austerities, and that was a common belief at the time. So the belief was that if you sort of tortured the body, starved it of food, stayed out in the hot sun, held awkward positions for long periods of time, then you would liberate your spirit. So he did that, and he's renowned for his austerities. But again, after a few years, he decided that still wasn't leading him to the solution he needed. So he sort of, if you like, he fell back on his own resources, and he decided to sit and meditate in a very dedicated and committed way until he attained the realization of the truth, if you like, of reality, which he did, and he attained enlightenment. So the Buddha became enlightened. So Gautama became the Buddha. And after that point, he started collecting followers. So he was well known, and people went to him for teaching. And to be accepted into his sangha, his group of followers, people would have to accept his teaching, and they would have to accept him as their teacher. And apparently, in the book, Sangharakshita says that, if he accepted them, he would just say, "Come, bhikkhu." Bhikkhu literally meaning beggar, but actually it's another word for a monk as well. He'd say, "Come, bhikkhu," and that meant they'd been accepted, and he would accept them as his follower. So it's quite simple. So he would collect followers, and very quickly he collected quite a lot of followers, and they may or may not have moved around the country with him, but they all met on a moon festival. So on the full moon and on the new moon, they would meet, and they would recite the teachings of the Buddha, and that was what unified them, the teachings, and their company. They would meet up. If they didn't travel literally together, they would meet at assigned places on the moon festivals, and they would gain strength from each other in the teachings of the Buddha. And they became in the book. Sangharakshita calls them the Buddha Sangha of the four quarters. So the four quarters being the four cardinal points on the compass. So in other words, they roamed. They weren't tied down to a particular place. And that's really what Sangharakshita in the book calls the first stage of the development of the Sangha. So where they had the Buddha teachings which united them, they roamed and they met at regular intervals, and that really the first stage occurred throughout the Buddha's life, and after the Buddha's life, that was the beginning of the second stage. And in the second stage, that was sort of marked by what's called the meeting of the first council. So a lot of the senior monks met, and really, you can imagine that their teachers died. They've all spent many years. The Buddha taught for 45 years. So they would all many of them would have had decades of teaching under their belt, so to speak, and they would have known a lot. They would have known a lot about his teachings and the way the Buddha felt that people should behave, and they recorded these in terms of an oral recording. They decided that there were over 500 items that would become their monastic code, how they should behave now that the Buddha had died. And so when they met then on their meetings of the full moon and the new moon, they would not only recite the teachings, but they would also reflect on how they'd been following the code, and they would confess where they felt that they'd not been true to the monastic code. They would make a confession of that. And so it changed the nature slightly of these meetings, and it further differentiated the Buddha's followers from other followers. They had their own code of conduct, and they had their own teachings, those teachings of the Buddha. And that was what Sangharakshita describes as the second stage in the development of the Sangha. So the Buddha had died. The people needed to come together, develop, acknowledge amongst themselves how they behave, and check with themselves that they were actually doing that. And then in the third stage, in the third and final stage in this description, Sangharakshita talks about the Buddha, some monks staying resident in a particular location. So what I haven't said is that in India, about 3 months of the year, they have the rainy season, and it's not really possible to move around. So it was common for people to stay in the same place. But then when the rain stopped, they would go on their wanderings in various places. And in the third stage, at some point, over time, over a period of 200 or 300 years, the practice where some people would not actually move from their rainy season retreat, they'd stay in whatever abode they had. It would be something quite simple. It might have been a cave. It might have been a sort of a simple hut. Nothing dramatically, nothing grand. They may stay there. So and that became a trend, if you like, and more people began to do that. And in doing so, they became more accessible to the people in the locality of their abode, and they apparently, that accessibility was something which meant the donations to them as monks became quite a practice, and they would be able to build up communities by staying in the same place. There's these three stages. There's a stage while the Buddha was alive. There's a stage after he died, when they developed their own monastic code, and there's this further stage where some of the monks lived in a fixed abode. You could always call it a monastery, if you like. That they developed into monasteries, and it's not that one stage completely supplanted the one before it. At any point in time, there will be people who lived in fixed abodes. There will be people who still wandered, freely, if you like, and met on festival occasions. But if you like, the what stands out I suppose in Buddhist history is these monasteries, because they're larger, and they were places where the monastic code could be preserved, augmented. People could study and do analyses of the teachings. So these centres, these monasteries, if you like, are almost like universities in a sense, in that they became centres of learning and specialisation in the Dharma. And there were pilgrimages from one centre of learning to another to pick up particular things. And you hear stories about people travelling from not only from one monastery to another, but from one country to another to pick up special teachings. And ultimately there were institutions like Nalanda, which was existed between about the 5th and the 12th century. And it was one of the sort of greatest centres of learning in the ancient world, there were thousands of monks that lived there, and many great interpreters of the Dharma and teachers of the Dharma, whose learnings we still learn from, whose teachings we still learn from. So that's if you like, a sort of a run through a couple of thousand years of development of the Sangha. And I thought I might say a couple of things, running a little bit over time, so sorry about that. A couple of things about Triratna. Triratna. So Triratna is the Buddhist organisation that we belong to, and Triratna means 3 jewels, which is the study that we're doing of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And maybe a little bit about how it relates to what I've been saying about the general development of the Sangha over the years. So I mentioned right at the beginning there was a sort of an ethical code of these spiritual wanderers, and when we become, if you like, more serious about being involved with Triratna, we might want to become a friend of Triratna. And when we do that, we say that one of the things that we do is that we say that, well, you know, we'll try to follow the precepts or the ethical code, and that's really not to harm living beings. Actually, I'll put it in a positive context. It perhaps sounds a bit more positive. So to try to act with loving kindness towards other people, to act generously, to try to maintain a sort of a stillness and contentment in our lives, to tell the truth, and to be mindful. You know, it's not earth-shatteringly complex, I don't think, and not a million miles from what we expect in our culture generally. But nevertheless, we every now and again we'll meet up and we'll see how, you know, if there's anything, if we've been following that well or not. So that's one thing. So the idea about an ethical code is here, and then going for refuge. So what I didn't say was once the Buddhist Sangha started getting bigger, people could be admitted into the Sangha, not just by the Buddha, particularly obviously after he died, but by senior disciples of the Buddha, and they would ask, and to be admitted, people would need to say that they were going for refuge. They were treating as central to their lives the Buddha, the Buddha's teachings, and the community of people who follow the Buddha's teachings, and that's something that in Triratna, when we become part of the Triratna order, which this signifies, this casus, what it signifies, then that's something which within our organisation, that senior members of the order need to see that the person that's asking to become a member of the order has central in their life the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. But one thing, you know, we don't wander with begging bowls, and we don't, you know, wander the streets and move from place to place. Well, not many of us anyway that I know of. So in the modern world, we live in a sort of variety of lifestyles. We know, myself, I have a family life. I have children and a wife, and I live at home. Other people might live with their partners. They might live alone, or they might live in communities, Buddhist communities. So there's a whole variety of ways that we live. And Sangharakshita himself said that commitment to the Dharma is the primary focus, and the lifestyle is secondary. So it's not really how you live; it's what you're doing and how you're thinking and how you're acting that's important.
Well, thank you. I really appreciated you kind of mapping out the history. Actually, I think it's really good to see kind of how the more kind of traditional monastic life that we might be familiar with has sort of evolved. So you're not a monk. I'm not a nun. But I was just wondering if maybe we wanted to have a little chat about maybe some of the kind of principles of a monastic life that we might be kind of inspired by in our own lives, even though we're not, you know, off living in a monastery.
Yeah, it's funny actually. When I was preparing this, I was thinking, yeah, I'm not a monk, but I'd like to think I'm in some way towards being a monk. You know, I don't, I think that harsh division, you know, we talked about right at the beginning of the talk between people who were lay and people who were monks, you know, and there's that and the sort of thing that you maybe moved a little bit and changed your life a little bit, and you're a sort of lay follower, or if you're, you know, if you're fully focused and on realizing the Dharma, then you know you're a monk. And I you know I can't honestly say myself that I'm, you know, I couldn't put myself in that classification, but I think I'm somewhere between the two. I feel like I'm astride the sort of two positions. And I hope moving towards the second, you know, the monk. In terms of your question, which I completely ignored.
What kind of the sort of principles of monastic living that you might be drawn to more and more in your life? Yes, I can see you're moving towards something.
We are, but I think the key principle is a dedication to realising the Dharma, you know, at its simplest. And you know, and so how would I? What is it that I would like to do? How would I like to live that life, if you like? And I'd like to. And I'd like to I'd like to gain. You know, to feel the support of other people doing the same thing. I think that's important. I don't feel personally drawn to living in a community for a long period. Yeah. You know, I'm still in that sense. I'm still a lay sort of follower. You know, I've got my family life, and I find I'm comfortable there, but I can see that, you know. Well, no, I mean, I think, you know, I was ordained, you know, quite late in life, relatively speaking, and I see my life as being set in the family context, but I still feel that I can get that support from the Sangha in, you know, things like this and retreats and, you know, and the various other things we do through Ratna, and so yeah, to be dedicated to realising the Dharma, and to do that with the support of people doing the likewise. It's quite simple, really. How about you?
Yeah. As soon as I posed that question, I was like, oh, I'm going to have to answer that one as well, aren't I? Yeah, I think yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about more recently is around simplicity, and I think one of the things I've really appreciated sort of over the years, because I sort of first came in contact with the Dharma when I was 21, and one of the things I really loved was was going on retreat and giving up makeup. I know it might sound like really, really simple, but like I grew up with a school where like you put your face on every single day, and it's a big thing, and you don't feel like you can show up in your own body, and you want to look a particular way, you need your body to look a particular way, and you know that's where you're getting a lot of your sense of like self-worth from. And there's a lot of time and money spent on the whole makeup body thing. So yeah, I think like something just as like, it now seems so simple because I'm wearing a bit of mascara now, but you know, I used to wear a lot of makeup as a young woman and as a teenager, and letting go of the kind of so much more concern about my physical appearance. Like that's something I really appreciated as well, because often I was going on retreat just with other women, so that I really appreciated that. And I was also recently on retreat, and a sort of extension of that is around like clothing. So I was recently on retreat. It was going to be a lot longer one, but we were just wearing like simple blue clothes. So like this is one of the things, my mum made this dress for me for my ordination retreat, which is lovely. And it was so nice just like not having to think like every day around like who I was and what I looked like, just having like basically like a uniform to wear every day of like the same clothes, they're all blue for a couple of weeks. I really liked that as well. So I've been interested a bit more recently around what I can learn from the lifestyle, the slightly more monastic lifestyle that isn't just about, because I completely get what you're saying around it's our sort of commitment that's sort of first, but there are some things about that lifestyle that I do find interesting, like the kind of radical simplicity and not being so concerned about my personal wealth and that sort of thing as well. I went wild camping a little bit last year as well, and when you brought up the Sangha right at the beginning, when they're kind of wandering, I found it really interesting to go wild camping. Because you know, there's certainly certainly wasn't out in like a forest in jungle in India, like surrounded by like tigers and wild animals. But I did feel like vulnerable just in like a tiny little tent.
But if you look back at the time of the Buddha and you think about his followers, then they were sort of, and if you think about the normal idea of a monastery, you think, well, they're a fixed community and they're stuck away from the world, and they can be live a simple life and etc. But what about us? Because we sort of live in a world where, you know, when we're on retreat or something, we can do what you say and be simple and not wear makeup and etc. and be content with that. But what about when you're put into situations where, you know, that's not the case? You're not around a Buddhist community. Do you find that difficult?
Yeah, no. But I guess it sort of depends on like what the situation is. But like one thing I really noticed is that my life now feels like there's more integrity between like my inner values and my outer life. So I used to work like in quite a toxic work environment, for example, where it was really hard to live out my values because of like there was bullying and all sorts of things. And one thing that's changed now is I work with people who share those same values. They're not Buddhist, but I can be myself in that kind of work environment. So I do think quite a bit of what has happened is I have shifted my life around so that it's more in line with those values. So it's I'm surrounded by more like-minded people, whether they're Buddhist or not, so it is easier to kind of have that integrity. There is no, I mean, like, honestly, I should get you some photos of what I was like as a teenager, but there is no foundation on my face, which is quite a win. You know, so I do feel like I can be myself more now in the outside world in a way that I didn't used to have so much confidence.
Yeah, I think my experience has been, it's a bit difficult, it's happened over many years, but I think my experience has been that there was a definite me at a Buddhist centre and me outside the Buddhist centre, you know.
And they matched up a bit more now.
But they've matched up more, and the influence has obviously gone from the Buddhist centre out into my other life. So I've become more like my Buddhist self in my outer life.
Yeah.
I think they're pretty well matched now, but there's probably still a few cracks there.
Great, so I hope you enjoyed that Dharma Night talk. So if you did enjoy it, if you're enjoying our videos, I just want to ask you or encourage you to think about making a donation to the Brixton Buddhist community. We're a UK charity that relies completely on your donations to run everything here. And if this was a class, a meditation class, there'd be a donation bowl that you could just put in £10 at the end of the night to help support the activities. But as you're watching this online, I just want to ask you to think about making an online donation. If you've watched 4 or 5 videos this month, maybe you might want to think about giving £10. So there's a link in the description below where you can go to our website and make a donation. And if you want to keep giving, you don't want to worry about making that donation every month, well, you could just set up a standing order, a monthly standing order. That would be really, really helpful. I want to suggest something of the region of maybe £10 or £20 a month if you're able to do that, and that would be really, really helpful and help us keep producing videos like this one. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourself.